The US economy is on the verge of collapse. I give it 2 more years, and then the whole house of cards will eventually implode.
How can you say that? Ben Bernanke and Obama said their policies fixed our economy.
They have fixed nothing. They have only made our economy worse.
Don't be absurd. We came out of the recession in July of '09 and our GDP is increasing.
The only things that are really increasing are government debt, government spending, unfunded liabilities, entitlement programs, people on food stamps, the unemployment rate, government regulations, government payrolls, huge budget-busting legislation like Obamacare, state and municipal debt, government power, credit card debt, bank defaults, toxic assets purchased by the Federal Reserve, inflation, interest rates, commodity prices and the money supply. This is not economic growth, it is an economic train wreck.
But we needed to spend money to prime the pump. Giving people money leads to job growth. Nancy Pelosi said that sending out unemployment checks is the quickest way to stimulate the economy.
That is nonsensical hogwash, and shows she knows nothing about economics. If that were true, why don't we all just quit our jobs and have the government pay each of us $100,000, or, better yet, $2 million? We could all just retire and be multimillionaires. Would not that be great?
Well, no one is advocating that. But just adding a little more water to prime the pump will get the water flowing again.
That pump priming metaphor stinks on ice. A better metaphor is that we are destroying the economic pump with a huge sledgehammer of debt and importing water all the way from China and Japan just to keep from dying from thirst.
But how do we stimulate demand, then?
Look, our problem is not a lack of demand. We have an infinite amount of demand. The problem is that America must rebuild its industrial base. America's wealth is being destroyed by over-government spending, excessive taxes, over-regulation, excessive debt, the devaluation of the dollar, inflation, and the increase of the public sector at the expense of private sector job growth. How can you say that our economy is growing under these circumstances?
But government spending is part of the GDP. If we increase government spending, we will increase the GDP.
But look, where is this money coming from? It is merely being confiscated from the private sector in the form of direct taxes, or in delayed taxes in the form of debt, which will have to be paid for in the future, or in indirect taxes in the form of inflation and dollar devaluation. The government is merely robbing Peter to pay Paul, thereby impoverishing Peter and enslaving Paul. It is simply wealth destruction, and hidden under the stupid euphemism of wealth redistribution.
But what is wrong with debt? After World War II, our national debt was 120% of GDP and that was not a problem. Now it's 100% of GDP, so we have nothing to worry about.
You must look at the context of that time. After World War II, we had a much stronger and robust economy. Our economy was still intact. Unlike most of the industrialized world that was ravaged by war, we were the world's largest creditor nation, whereas now we are the world's largest debtor nation. We had an annual trade surplus, but currently, we have almost $1 trillion annual trade deficit. We had a dynamic industrial-based economy, whereas now we have a dying service-based economy. Most debt was held domestically, whereas now, it is held by China, Japan, Europe, and Saudi Arabia. Government spending fell 66% after the war, whereas now we have $2 trillion in deficits every year. Business regulations were manageable, whereas now they are debilitating. Debt is only beneficial if it is sustainable. The US debt is currently clearly unsustainable.
How can you say it is unsustainable? As long as we can pay interest, it is sustainable.
The only reason we can manage our debt now is by artificially keeping interest rates near zero. When interest rates rise, we won't be unable to pay interest, and will have to default.
That is crazy. All we have to do is keep interest rates at zero.
How is it possible to keep interest rates low forever? In the early 80s, interest rates were 17%. If interest rates increased to those levels again, interest payments alone would exceed tax revenues.
That will never happen again.
Why not?
Because we are America.
I don't know whether I should laugh or cry.
No. I mean, foreign countries must continue to buy our debt because they need us to buy their goods.
Well, first of all, we are not really buying anything from our trading partners. We are merely borrowing money from them for products we no longer make, with money we do not have, on credit cards we use too much, for stuff we do not really need, to be put in houses that are too big for us to afford. In exchange, our trading partners get devalued paper, which causes inflation in their countries. Eventually, our trading partners will no longer want our devaluing paper, and will transform their export-oriented economy to a domestic market-based economy.
But if they stopped exporting to America, it would hurt their economies.
Yes, initially, but just during the transition period. After that, their economies would be booming, inflation would fall, living standards would improve, and their currencies would strengthen. So, instead of getting devaluing pieces of paper and importing America's inflation, they would get a growing and sustainable domestic economy. So, America just needs them more than they need us.
So, what should we do?
The solutions are very simple in concept, but very difficult to achieve. Our government must stop running deficits, stop fabricating unconstitutional powers, and switch from a government-controlled economy to a free market economy. We must cut government spending by 30% from current levels by vastly cutting entitlement programs, replace Medicare with private insurance, repeal Obamacare, stop government student loans, renegotiate public sector pensions, make public sector unions illegal, stop all corporate and farm subsidies, phase out Social Security, close down all unconstitutional federal departments such as HUD, Education, EPA, Labor, Homeland Security, Agriculture and others, implement a flat tax, repeal all antitrust and minimum wage laws, and all these are just for starters.
Almost none of those things will ever happen.
Precisely my point. Most politicians are only concerned about getting re-elected by making irresponsible promises to get votes, and far too many Americans are willing to sacrifice freedom for a false and temporary sense of security. That is why I think it will collapse in around 2 years.
So, how do you think the collapse will play out?
Well, it has already started with the Fed's quantitative easing, parts 1 and 2. America has never just printed money to roll over debt. The Fed will continue do this as this is all their last card they can play.
But Ben Bernanke said the Fed is just increasing bank reserves and not printing money.
As my business law professor said, that is a distinction without a difference. Eventually those trillions of dollars in bank reserves will enter the market through bank loans or asset purchases, and then inflation will lead to higher interest rates, and the interest payments on debt will be what causes the collapse.
But Bernanke said we have a problem with deflation, not inflation.
Bernanke says a lot of things, and unfortunately, almost everything he says or thinks is simply wrong. We already have inflation. Just over the past 6 months, oil prices are up 20%, corn and wheat are up 50%, sugar is up 70%, soybeans are up 30%, and on and on. The Fed is just misrepresenting true inflation with their bogus core price index manipulation.
Well, does not inflation mean that we can simply pay off our debt with cheaper dollars in the future?
Yes, that is the Bernanke game plan, but our bondholders are not going to stand there like Wile E. Coyote watching a huge boulder fall from the sky to crush them. They will demanding higher yields, and will also try to unload their existing debt at a discount. Either way, spiking yields will cause interest rates to climb higher, and it is those high interest payments that will eventually collapse our economy. It is actually pretty hopeless at this point, and this is even without considering all the bankrupt states like California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey and many others.
But is not America too big to fail? Cannot other countries bail us out?
Unfortunately, Europe is already bankrupt from many decades of socialism, so they cannot help us, and other countries do not have enough money to bail us out of our 14 trillion in debt, and over 50 trillion in unfunded liabilities.
Other than all those drastic proposals you mentioned earlier, are there not less draconian measures that can be taken to fix our economic problems?
Not really. Half measures, like freezing spending and modest budget cuts, will simply postpone the inevitable at this point. It is not simply overspending and deficits that have gotten us here. It is also the abandonment of capitalism, the growth of government rules and regulations forcing good jobs and entire industries to move overseas, the entitlement mentality, the growth of unions, our failed education system, the abandonment of the Constitution, and many other factors that have all contributed to our failed economy. Until all these and other issues are addressed, America has little chance for averting a collapse at this point.
So, what are you proposing, that we simply give up?
No, not at all. It is important that as many Americans as possible protect as much of their wealth as possible by getting out of the dollar and into gold, silver, foreign stocks, foreign currencies and foreign bonds, so they can help rebuild America after the collapse. It is also important that as many people as possible fully understand how we got to this terrible situation, so that the same mistakes are not made in the future. If we have a firm and strong base to collapse onto, at least the restoration process will not take as long, and we'll have a firm foundation upon which to build a new republic. If we collapse into anarchy, then it may take generations to restore.
That is a pretty depressing and pessimistic view of our future, don't you think?
Look, at this stage, we don't need naive cheerleaders. We need people of vision, character, and courage to fix as much as possible before the collapse. Americans have always managed to rise up to meet big challenges, and I still believe there is sufficient American spirit to get us through this. I feel this will actually be America's finest hour, and we will emerge from this collapse much stronger than we were before.
Well, we shall see what actually happens.
And so we shall, and so we shall.